So on today's episode of Mental Health, I've got the three guys back, Johnny, Karen and Paul, and we're just gonna do a second half interview on the mental health. How's it been since the last interview and how they feel ever since the lockdown has been relaxed. So we're gonna start off with Paul, then Johnny and Karen. So Paul, since the last lockdown and since the easing of the lockdown, how has your mental health been?
Since lockdown measures have been eased, I've definitely been happier in terms of mental health. I would say partly because in last podcast, I touched on the fact that I started a new job last year in September, so I'd barely been to the office and see my new colleagues. And since around June, July, things have been opening up a lot more. So I've been seeing more colleagues and having more of a natural work interaction, and that's great because obviously with work you do it every day. I'd really started getting to know my colleagues, but now actually sort of seeing them face to face and also having socials and getting to know them, that's been quite rewarding. And then also maybe touching on, say, I'm sure it applies to everyone, family-wise, because I was quite sensitive about seeing my family beforehand because my parents worked in NHS and my sisters were living in different areas. But now I've been able to see family more often, including celebrating mine, my little sisters, and my mum's birthdays in August. So doing normal things, going to restaurants, having food. So yeah, generally feeling a bit more connected and a bit more happy as well. So yeah, things have been good. Managed to go away to Cornwall last week as well. Something that probably wouldn't have done in the peak of lockdown. Went with a friend, and that was great. So yeah, with things opening up, things have been better mental health wise, I'd say.
Johnny?
Yeah, I would actually say, arguably the inverse for me. So if you remember in our last conversation, I was saying that actually in terms of the impact of the pandemic mental health wise, I think I was able to navigate it reasonably well given my specific circumstance. But actually coming out has presented a new series of challenges. So it's kind of difficult to know how much to relax yourself, right? So I've been quite conscious of, being very careful when being in open spaces, and I'm still sort of like, it makes me a bit like apprehensive to go into crowded places with lots of people still. So there's been an interesting impact from that perspective for me. And I think actually, yeah, if anything, the easing of the lockdown has been more challenging for me than during the lockdown itself, which is an unusual perspective perhaps.
Karen, finally.
Yeah, I think probably when we last spoke, I don't think I really felt that there had been that much impact on me through lockdown. And sort of over the past couple of months coming out of that, I've realized that, that might not have been the case. So as it is right, I've decided to take a couple of steps to address it on a personal basis and address sort of, things like self-perception, identities, all that sort of stuff that I'm sort of going through now. So at the minute, I'm feeling very, very positive about that. Probably 6 weeks ago, I wasn't feeling quite so great about it. So, not necessarily lockdown related per se, but it's interesting for me that when we had this chat last time round, I sort of thought, as Johnny said, I sort of navigated through quite unscathed, and maybe that just hadn't been the case.
And so, Paul, so we've come out of lockdown now and things are opening up. Do you feel more, I would say more, safer now that most people have gotten the vaccine? Or do you still think we've got a long way to go?
But yeah, I just addressed the last question, actually. I think it's just quite interesting how some of our positions vary. And I'm thinking back to the previous pod, I think I just moved house to be alone. And I think that presented some challenges. So I think maybe in a sense, I feel quite strong positive feelings towards things opening up and seeing people. So I think it might potentially be unique to my living situation. But anyway, sorry, moving back to your last question. So do I feel safe
Yeah,
given the vaccine rollout and everything?
yeah.
I'm slightly skeptical in a way. I mean, perhaps based on how the whole pandemic's been handled by, say, the nation and everything. And also just based on what I understand about the vaccine. So from what I understand, it doesn't give you full immunization against
It
the
doesn't.
virus.
Just to say,
In the same way others, you
yeah.
can still transmit it
Yep.
and you can still have some form of symptoms. So like, I don't see it as a sort of solution that, takes us to the end of sort of trials and tribulations. And also from what I understand, like also not everyone has necessarily taken the vaccine, but I know like a very large proportion have. I would, in summary, I'd say I feel safe in myself, given that I've taken the vaccine. I'm sort of relatively young, relatively healthy. So with things opening up, I feel
Well, you do
like fairly
realize.
comfortable.
Sorry,
Carry on.
you do realize that you can still get it, right? Because I got it 2 weeks ago, and I'm taking the first dose. So I got my first dose back
Mhm.
in June.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got it about 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily protect you at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say within myself, I feel fairly comfortable just going about, sort of things, and with things opening up and going to venues and being amongst people. I am hesitant about traveling abroad though. That's something I've actually avoided doing just in case I get stuck abroad, in case I get COVID. Yeah. In summary, that's how I feel about it.
Cool. And Johnny?
Yeah,
The
same question.
Yep, the same question too.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, right? Because obviously the sort of world that I inhabit, I guess, being a scientist, I'm inundated with information on this every day, so it's like it can be quite a different angle.
Johnny, sorry, I wanted to ask you on the scientist. So obviously there's all these conspiracy about COVID was pre-planned and so on and so on, and it was just a way for the government and the people in higher power to control us. What's your idea on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredibly unlikely, super duper unlikely. So there's some parts. What happens here is like a problem, a sort of common fallacy with people when they get bits of information and get things confused. So there is a chance, a reasonable chance. I think it's now been concurred that it's unlikely to be the case, but there is a reasonable chance that the virus emanated from a lab, right? Now, that's something entirely separate from saying it was deliberately released from a lab. And I think that distinction is blurry. And then there's one step even beyond that distinction to say that actually this was intentionally released as a means to, I don't know, control people. Or, I mean, this has been obviously devastating globally for all economies.